Hope everybody out there is having a fantastic Tuesday. We have a great show on tap for today's Philadelphia Eagles Now by Chat Sports. I'm Chase Sr. Thank you so much for being here with us. As for what we're going to cover on the show today, Eagles draft buzz really starting to heat up a couple of days away from Thursday's NFL draft as Howie Roseman and the Birds appear to be honing in on two positions in the first round. Speaking of the NFL draft, we here on Eagles Now, we're going to be live from April 25th through the 27th. All 3 days of the draft, every single round, every single pick. We'll be talking about it right here on the show. You do not want to miss our coverage, so lock us in today and hit that sub button right now. Some news items I want to get to before we start talking about the draft here, and this report from Tom Pelissero has to do with the NFL draft partially. From the NFL on possible tampering for the Eagles and the Falcons, the league's review into both matters, the Falcons' pursuit of Kirk Cousins, the Eagles' pursuit of Saquon Barkley, is ongoing and will not conclude this week. So, no resolution before the draft, and 2024 picks involved are not going to be taken away from Philadelphia or Atlanta. If picks do get taken away from both organizations, maybe it comes in the 2025 draft. Maybe it happens to be a fine from the NFL levied upon Philadelphia and Atlanta. But the draft selections for the Eagles in the upcoming draft not impacted by the Saquon Barkley tampering situation. And then there's this, and you can also tie this in to the Eagles planning for the NFL draft, because the league announcing today it's reinstating Isaiah Rodgers, who is suspended for the 2023 season for violating the NFL's gambling policy. He may participate in all team activities. That news allows him to join the team immediately. And there was some buzz, there was some chatter over the weekend, and we talked about it here on Eagles Now, that maybe Isaiah Rodgers was not going to get reinstated because 5 players who were suspended for violating the league's gambling policy had been reinstated. Rodgers was not included on that list. He deactivated his Instagram, and so there was some buzz because he bet on his team that maybe he was going to be suspended for 2 years because the NFL came out with that ruling after Isaiah Rodgers had bet. And I made the case on the show, if the NFL goes ahead and they suspend him 2 years after they made a rule, after they already suspended him, I thought he had a case in court. But this is important for Philadelphia because Rodgers is a very good player, highly graded cornerback, and has special teams ability. Not sure how that impacts the Eagles' plans at the cornerback position, but it might come Thursday night in the draft. Now let's start talking about the draft here, and I think this is a good place to start. Let's talk about Howie Roseman's team-building philosophy. This is built upon what he has said as far as constructing an NFL roster. First and foremost, you have to find your franchise quarterback. The Eagles deemed themselves a couple of years ago as a quarterback factory. Number 2, you want to protect that quarterback and fortify the offensive line. The Eagles in particular have always put an emphasis on offensive tackle. Trey Thomas, John Runyon, nowadays, Lane Johnson, Jordan Mailata. They made the move for Jason Peters way back in the day. You get the point that offensive tackle, protecting the quarterback's blind side, the front side, always of the utmost importance. And I'd say you can make the argument that quarterback, offensive tackle, edge rusher, the 3 most important positions on a football club. Number 4, you got to attack the quarterback with your defensive line. If that quarterback doesn't have all day to survey the field and pick your part, your defense, you're in a good spot. And Howie Roseman said this last year during the offseason, which I thought was really interesting. He said specifically on defense, we want to fortify our defensive line, build that up, stack it up with some premier playmakers, but then in today's pass-happy NFL, you have to be able to have top-tier cornerback play. So what this means for the draft, in order here, as we took a look at Howie Roseman's team-building philosophy, well, Philadelphia doesn't need a quarterback. They have Jalen Hurts. The offensive line is good, but they do need some depth. And Lane Johnson starting to get a little bit older at right tackle. You signed Jordan Mailata to a contract extension at left tackle. The defensive line, as far as depth, and because of the youth with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, Fletcher Cox retiring. There are some question marks at that position. Edge rusher the same because Hassan Reddick is now playing for the New York Jets. Bryce Huff has one good season of production. Brandon Graham is older. Josh Sweat, you had to restructure his deal. And outside of that, what is Zach Bond going to give you? So edge rusher depth is a little bit of an issue too as we look ahead to draft time, but cornerback is a huge need. So where I think we're headed, my read on what the Eagles' draft plans could be in the first round, and then obviously that trickles to the rest of the draft, is that the Eagles either go with an offensive tackle or a cornerback in the first round. And let's follow the paper trail, as I believe we're very good at doing that here on this show. And that's why we're able to predict some of these things that end up happening way before they happen, because I think I'm good at having some foresight and reading the tea leaves a little bit. Adam Schefter with the report on Monday that Howie Roseman making calls to trade up, potentially, specifically he mentioned, for a cornerback. Daniel Jeremiah, one of the best NFL draft analysts out there, had an interesting thing to say to NBC Sports Philadelphia, that he calls schools and universities in order to get intel. And he's been calling around, and schools have told him that the Eagles are doing a lot of work on cornerbacks. And we have shown you the list of their pre-draft 30 visits. A lot of offensive linemen, offensive tackles for sure, and a lot of cornerbacks. And then Albert Breer, we're going to get to his report here in just a little while. He is hearing that the Eagles have been tied to a lot of offensive tackles. Here is that Adam Schefter report that we talked about on Monday's show. Eagles general manager Howie Roseman, a history of trading up for round one players that he wants, Andre Dillard, Devontae Smith, Jordan Davis, and then again to get Jalen Carter. If Roseman wants a corner at number 22, as many people around the league believe he could, he might have to move up again. Per sources, he's already been calling around, gauging what a trade-up might look like to be prepared for what has become a near-annual tradition. It's also worth noting, Roseman, who's been Philadelphia's general manager since 2010, has never drafted a corner, tight end, running back, or safety in round one. And if the Eagles do trade up in order to target a corner, there are two cornerback trade-up targets that I believe are on the Philadelphia Eagles' radar. Trey Arnold, the cornerback out of Alabama, and then Quintin Mitchell, the cornerback out of Toledo. I like some of the other first-round cornerbacks in this draft class that we've talked about a bunch here on the show, but those are the two players that are gathering a lot of steam for the Eagles' interest in trade-up candidates, because they've been mentioned as some of those cornerbacks who might go inside the top 15. I like Kool-Aid McKinstry a lot. Now, when I scout Trey Arnold, 5'11", 189, 4.5 40-yard dash. So the speed isn't great, but it's solid. He was a freshman All-American 2 years ago. First-team All-American this past year. Good size, good feet. I like his pedal ability at that cornerback spot. Very good route recognition and anticipation. Good vertical speed and deceleration. Very important to have those skills at the cornerback spot. Year one, I think that he could be a plug-and-play guy. If not, or maybe additionally, he can also play special teams. 301 special team snaps in 2022 and 2023. I like his competitiveness. He could play inside, outside. The top end speed just okay, which is a little bit of a concern. Quintin Mitchell, a little bit bigger, a little bit faster, a little bit longer. Definitely has a little bit more pass breakups too, although that came in the MAC, playing at Toledo. 6 foot, 195 pounds, a 4.33 40-yard dash. He's a fluid and smooth athlete, very, very composed. Balanced, also good at recognizing routes from wide receivers. When the ball flies and is in the air, Quintin Mitchell flies. No penalties in 2023. That is tremendous. Just a high football IQ, very good awareness, and very good instincts and feel. 44 pass breakups over the last 2 years. Consistently makes a play on the football. He asked his coaches at Toledo to coach him hard. That'll work well in Philadelphia, and that'll play. The play strength kind of just okay. It's not like he can add a bunch onto that frame. He did play a lot of off-man and off-zone, so if you're asking him to jam at the line of scrimmage, sometimes he can struggle with that. And then another concern, he did play in the MAC. It is not the SEC. For Philadelphia, I don't think you can go wrong here with either one of those cornerbacks, and Trey Arnold or Quintin Mitchell. And I would be fine with the trade-up because you need to fortify that position with Darius Slay being 34, James Bradbury being 31, not just now, but in the future too. Other corners who I think could be in play in round one if the Eagles stay put or if they trade back. Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama, really fond of the player. Nate Wiggins, a 4.28 40-yard dash at the NFL Scouting Combine. He's light, but he can fly. Cooper DeJean, a Swiss Army knife. Ennis Rakestraw's been gathering some buzz. Maybe he can sneak into the first round out of Mizzou. And then TJ Tampa out of Iowa State, fringe first rounder or a second round target for Philadelphia. Now coming up next here on the show, I hope that you've been informed so far, an NFL insider hearing offensive tackle for the Birds. And this offensive tackle class also stacked for the Eagles' liking. First, let's tell you about our sponsor for today's Eagles Now, and that is Game Time. With the Game Time app, you can see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. All-in prices show your total up front, so you know that you are getting a great deal without hidden fees. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event or even an hour after it starts. And Philadelphia Phillies, they are on fire right now, scoring a bunch of runs. Their pitching rotation, the best in the National League statistically. You want to go to a Philadelphia Phillies game at Citizens Bank Park, you can do that. You want to go to a 76ers New York Knicks playoff game on either Thursday night or Sunday? We've been doing watch parties for that series on 76ers now, by the way. Won't be doing Game 3. The Wells Fargo Center is going to be electric with the Sixers down 2-0 after the referees stole a game away from the grasp of the Sixers. Best seats, lowest price guaranteed. Prices drop as the event gets closer. You get $20 off using the code CHATSPORTS. That link is down below in the show notes of this video. So as for the NFL insider who's hearing offensive tackle for the Birds, I told you we're tying all of these things together. Cornerback, offensive tackle. This offensive tackle class, deep for the Eagles here if they do want to go that route. And this report coming from Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated. The position I've heard most consistently assigned to the Eagles is offensive tackle. It might seem a little strange given the team's needs on defense and in the secondary in particular, but General Manager Howie Roseman always prioritized the lines and worked to get ahead of potential holes. That's an important line right there, working to get ahead. So finding the eventual replacement for Lane Johnson, who's entering his 12th year, is in play with the group of tackles in this year's class, so highly regarded, though. It's unclear whether the right one for Philly makes it to 22. And this also brings up what Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni said last week at their pre-draft press conference, where Howie was so complimentary of Lane Johnson, but talked about the importance of really honing in on that position to have a guy who can be a franchise icon for a long time, and he mentioned by name Lane Johnson, Jason Kelce. Now, this is a deep enough offensive tackle class where I think the Eagles can find a quality one at number 22 overall, but if they love a player, they have shown, as we talked about before, that they will trade up with all of the players that we mentioned, Howie Roseman specifically trading up for. My top offensive tackle prospects, I do not think Joe Alt out of Notre Dame is going to be available for the Eagles. I think he could be a top 5 to 10 pick, depending on if a team moves up or just how that top 10 goes. Olu Fashanu out of Penn State, very light, not a lot of bad weight on that body, an extremely nimble mover. The same can be said for Joe Alt. I mean, these guys are athletic freaks. This is within the range, though, where things could become a little bit interesting. You have Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State, J.C. Latham out of Alabama, and Amarius Mims out of Georgia. Fuaga, Latham, they're probably in that 11 to 16 range. That is within range for the Eagles to trade up. I think Amarius Mims, freakish ability, 6'8", 340, long-ass arms, only 8 college starts, though, so he's extremely raw. That's a player who could fall to the Eagles at 22 overall. Those are players that are worth trading up for. And like I said, Mims could be had at 22, and Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni also said, we're fine with drafting a player who's a draft and stash, to use an NBA term, where they don't have to play right from the jump. You don't need him to play right from the jump. If you go Amarius Mims, who's played right tackle because Lane Johnson is there, but you were developing him for the future, knowing that he's under team control for the next 5 years. The following players who we're going to talk about here are offensive tackles who I think are there at 22, or if the Eagles move back in that first round, second-round players, and then Karan Amagaji, maybe a third-round guy. So you look at the next phase of this list after my top 5, Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma, Kingsley Suamataia. Guyton struggles a little bit in the ground game, but extremely light feet, basketball feet, has this nasty streak to him. If he stays focused and healthy and engaged, he could be a perennial All-Pro. Kingsley Suamataia, a lot of experience playing right tackle and left tackle at BYU. He can be a mauler, but did wear down a little bit against upper echelon competition. Roger Rosengarten is an interesting player. Protected the blind side for the left-handed throwing Michael Penix. Did not give up a sack last year. Fastest 40-yard dash among all offensive tackles at the Combine. And Mel Kiper thinks that if he went back to school, could have been a top 10 pick in 2025. So the upside is certainly there. I think he's a fringe round 1, more so of a round 2 target. And then the same can be said for Patrick Paul out of Houston, who there's some buzz that maybe he gets drafted on night 1. I personally would be surprised. And then Karan Amagaji, the Eagles staff did go to watch his pro day because he got injured at the end of last year. Nothing all too serious, but they want to gauge where he is at in his development for a player who didn't pick the sport up until high school. How the board falls will determine a lot for Philadelphia. And I'm looking at what happens with the quarterbacks. What if a shocker happens? What if Bo Nix and Michael Penix go inside the top 10 or inside the top 15? What does that do? Effectively, it causes really good players that you didn't expect to go early to fall down the draft board. So the Eagles here do have some flexibility on which route to go night 1 of the draft, which obviously sets the table for Friday and Saturday. Which position should the Eagles draft? Among the 2 positions that we talked about on the show here today, offensive tackle, cornerback. Let me know down below. Make sure you tune into our draft coverage live on Thursday night, hour and a half, 2 hours before the official start of the draft. Can't wait for it. Hope to see you there. Peace.